April Holt never imagined that making funny videos in her tiny apartment would change her life forever. At just 19 years old, she had become one of the most popular creators on TikTok, with nearly 1 million followers who loved her bright smile and cheerful personality. Every morning she would wake up in her small studio apartment near the University of Iowa campus and check her phone to see hundreds of thousands of views on her latest video. The journey to internet fame had started almost by accident. April was studying communications at the university, struggling to pay for her textbooks and rent with her part-time job at Target. One evening, feeling stressed about an upcoming exam, she decided to film herself doing a silly dance to cheer herself up. She posted the 15-second video on TikTok without thinking much about it. The next morning, April woke up to find her phone buzzing non-stop. The video had gone viral overnight, gaining over 2 million views and thousands of comments from people who found her dance hilarious and her energy infectious. Within a week, she had gained 50,000 new followers, all eager to see what she would post next. April quickly learned that consistency was key to building an online following. She began posting new content every day, mixing comedy skits with makeup tutorials and honest talks about college life. Her videos often featured her cramped apartment, her struggles with studying, and her dreams of making it big in the entertainment industry. Her followers felt like they knew her personally, which was exactly what made her content so appealing. Her best friend Emma Wilson became her biggest supporter and frequent collaborator. Emma was a psychology student who lived in the dorm across campus, but she spent most of her free time at April's apartment, helping film videos and coming up with new content ideas. Emma was more reserved than April, preferring to stay behind the camera, but she had a great eye for what would work on social media. As April's follower count grew, so did the opportunities. Companies began reaching out to her, offering money to promote their products in her videos. At first, April could hardly believe it when a makeup company offered her $500 to review their new lipstick collection. Within 6 months, she was making enough money from brand partnerships to quit her job at Target and focus entirely on creating content. The financial freedom was life-changing for April, who had grown up in a modest household. Her mother, Carol, worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital, and money had always been tight, especially after April's father died in a car accident when she was 15. Being able to support herself through social media felt like a dream come true. April's content resonated with young people across the country who saw themselves in her struggles and victories. She talked openly about losing her father, about working to pay for college, and about the pressure of trying to figure out her future. Her authenticity was what set her apart from other creators who seemed to live perfect lives. But success on the internet came with unexpected challenges. As April's following grew, so did the number of strange messages she received from fans. Most were harmless expressions of admiration, but some made her uncomfortable. Users would comment on every detail of her appearance, analyze her background, to figure out where she lived, and some even claimed to be in love with her. One follower in particular had caught April's attention, though not in a good way. A user with the handle Bradley K87 had been commenting on her videos for months, and his messages were becoming increasingly personal. At first, his comments seemed like typical fan mail, praising her videos and telling her she was beautiful. But gradually, his messages became more possessive and demanding. Bradley Kane was a 28-year-old mechanic from Des Moines, about 2 hours away from April's college town. He lived alone in a small apartment above an auto repair shop where he worked, spending most of his free time online. Bradley had discovered April's content 6 months earlier and had become completely obsessed with her. Unlike April's other followers, Bradley had begun to believe that he had a special connection with her. He analyzed every video for clues about her daily routine, took screenshots of every outfit she wore, and had created detailed notes about her likes and dislikes. In his mind, April was speaking directly to him through her videos, and he was convinced that if he could just meet her in person, she would realize they were meant to be together. Bradley's messages to April had evolved from simple compliments to detailed fantasies about their future life together. He would write long comments about how he would take care of her, how he understood her better than anyone else, and how they could be happy together. When April didn't respond to his messages, Bradley became frustrated and began creating multiple, fake accounts to contact her. April had shown some of Bradley's messages to Emma, laughing them off as the price of being internet famous. She had received strange messages from fans before, and while Bradley's were more intense than most, she didn't feel genuinely threatened by them. She had never met him in person and had no reason to believe he would actually seek her out in real life. Tyler Brooks, April's closest male friend, had also noticed some of the concerning messages April received from fans. Tyler was a computer science student who had helped April set up her streaming equipment and manage her online presence. He was quiet and thoughtful, very different from April's outgoing personality, but they had become close friends over the past year. Tyler had developed romantic feelings for April, but he had never told her how he felt. He could see that she was focused on building her career and didn't want to complicate their friendship. Instead, he tried to support her dreams and protect her from some of the more troubling aspects of internet fame. Carol Holt worried constantly about her daughter's online presence. As a nurse, she had seen enough tragedy to know that the world could be a dangerous place, especially for young women. She was proud of April's success and grateful for the financial stability it provided, but she often urged her daughter to be more careful about sharing personal details in her videos. April would laugh off her mother's concerns, pointing out that millions of people posted on social media every day without any problems. She was careful not to show her exact address or share her class schedule, and she felt that was enough to keep her safe. The idea that someone might actually travel to find her seemed impossible to her young mind. As winter turned to spring in April's second year of internet fame, her dreams seemed within reach. She had been accepted into a summer internship program in Los Angeles, where she hoped to make connections in the entertainment industry. Brand partnerships were becoming more lucrative, and she was even in talks with a talent agency about representation. But while April was planning her bright future, Bradley Kane was planning something much darker. His obsession with her had grown beyond online stalking, and he had begun to research everything he could about her daily routine and the people in her life. The line between fantasy and reality was blurring for Bradley, and April had no idea that her biggest fan was about to become her greatest threat. February in Iowa was always bitter cold, but April Holt had learned to find joy even in the darkest winter days. On what would become the last day of her life, she woke up feeling excited about the future. Her phone showed dozens of notifications from her latest video, which had already gained 500,000 views overnight. The comments were mostly positive, filled with heart emojis and messages from fans telling her how much her content meant to them. April stretched and looked around her small studio apartment. Despite its cramped size, she had made it feel like home with fairy lights strung along the walls, plants on every available surface, and colorful throw pillows scattered on her secondhand couch. This tiny space had become the backdrop for her rise to internet fame, and she felt grateful for how far she had come. She had 3 midterm exams coming up that week, and the stress was starting to get to her. Balancing her communications degree with her growing social media career was becoming more challenging every day. Sometimes she wondered if she should just drop out of college and focus entirely on content creation. But her mother, Carol, had made her promise to finish her education. April decided to turn her exam stress into content, knowing her followers could relate to the struggle of college life. She set up her phone on the small tripod Tyler had given her and started recording. The video showed her surrounded by textbooks and notes, looking overwhelmed, but trying to stay positive. "Okay guys, midterm season is officially here and I am not ready," she said to the camera, making an exaggerated, worried face that made her look younger than her 19 years. "But we're going to survive this together, right? Remember, you're all amazing and you can handle whatever comes your way." She filmed several takes of the video, adding funny sound effects and text overlays to make it more entertaining. The final version was a perfect mix of relatable stress and encouraging positivity that her audience loved. She posted it at 6 in the evening with the caption "Midterm Madness, but we got this," followed by several emoji. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. Her followers shared their own exam stress stories and thanked her for the motivation. April always tried to respond to as many comments as possible, knowing that personal interaction was what kept her audience engaged. Among the hundreds of comments, she noticed several from Bradley K87. His messages were longer than usual and more intense. "You look tired, baby. You need someone to take care of you," one comment read. Another said, "I wish I could be there to help you study. We would make such a good team." April felt a slight chill reading the messages, but she decided not to respond. She had learned that ignoring the more concerning comments was usually the best approach. Engaging with users like Bradley only seemed to encourage them to send more messages. Emma Wilson arrived at April's apartment around 7:30, carrying her own stack of textbooks and a bag of snacks from the campus store. Emma was taking her psychology midterms too, and the two friends had planned to study together before grabbing dinner at their favorite pizza place downtown. "How did the video turn out?" Emma asked, settling onto the couch next to April and opening her textbook. "Pretty good, I think. It's already got like 200,000 views," April replied, scrolling through more comments on her phone. "Some of these fans are getting really weird, though. Look at this." She showed Emma some of Bradley's recent comments. Emma frowned as she read them, her psychology training making her more aware of concerning behavior patterns than most college students. "April, this guy has been commenting on every single one of your videos for months, and look how long these messages are getting," Emma said, scrolling through Bradley's comment history. "This isn't normal fan behavior. Maybe you should block him." April shrugged, not wanting to seem dramatic. "He's probably just lonely. Half my followers are probably lonely guys who think they're in love with me. It comes with the territory." "This feels different," Emma insisted. "Promise me you'll block him if he keeps getting weirder." "Fine, I promise," April said, though she was already thinking about other things. She had a brand partnership proposal to review, and she wanted to film another video before bed. The two friends studied for about an hour before deciding they were too tired to concentrate. Emma packed up her books and headed back to her dorm, planning to return the next morning for their planned study session. They hugged goodbye at the door, and April locked it behind her friend. April spent the rest of the evening editing another video she had filmed earlier that week. It was a makeup tutorial featuring products from a company that had sent her free samples. She enjoyed the creative process of editing, adding music and effects to make her content as engaging as possible. Around 10:30, April decided to call it a night. She was tired from a long day of classes and content creation, and she wanted to get enough sleep before her first midterm exam the next morning. She changed into her favorite pajamas, brushed her teeth, and settled into bed with her laptop to do some final editing. As she worked, April didn't notice the figure watching her apartment from the parking lot below. Bradley Kane had been sitting in his car for over an hour, studying the building layout and waiting for the right moment. He had driven the 2 hours from Des Moines that afternoon, telling his boss at the auto shop that he was sick and couldn't work. Bradley had been planning this night for weeks. He had studied April's schedule through her social media posts and knew that Emma usually left around this time on Tuesday evenings. He had also figured out which apartment was April's by matching the view from her window to the building's layout. Indeed, his twisted mind, Bradley believed that April had been sending him secret messages through her videos. When she talked about needing someone to take care of her or feeling stressed and alone, he was convinced she was speaking directly to him. Tonight, he had decided, was the night he would finally introduce himself and show her how much he loved her. Bradley had prepared for this moment carefully. He had researched the building's security, learned about the lock system, and even practiced what he would say when he met April face to face. He was carrying a small bag with items he thought might be useful, including zip ties, sleeping pills. He had stolen from his grandmother's medicine cabinet and gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. April finished her editing around 11:15 and closed her laptop. She was satisfied with how the video had turned out and planned to post it the next afternoon. She plugged in her phone to charge overnight and turned off the lights, looking forward to getting a good night's sleep before her busy day of exams. She had no idea that Bradley was already inside her building, having followed another resident through the main door and then picked the simple lock on her apartment door with tools he had brought from the auto shop. Her life was about to change forever, and the young woman who had brought joy to millions of people online was about to become the victim of one man's dangerous obsession. The last thing April posted on social media was a simple goodnight message on her Instagram story, showing her cozy apartment bathed in the soft glow of her fairy lights. Within hours, that image would take on a haunting quality as investigators tried to piece together the final moments of her life. The phone call that changed Carol Holt's life forever came at 12:45 in the morning. She was sleeping deeply after a long shift at the hospital when her phone started ringing with an unknown local number. As a nurse, Carol was used to getting emergency calls, but something about this one felt different even before she answered. "Mrs. Holt, this is Officer Jennifer Martinez with the Cedar Rapids Police Department. I'm calling about your daughter April. There's been an incident at her apartment." Carol's heart stopped. She sat up in bed, instantly wide awake. "What kind of incident? Is she hurt? Is she in the hospital?" The officer's voice was gentle but firm. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your daughter has passed away. We need you to come to her apartment as soon as possible." The words didn't make sense to Carol at first. April was 19 years old, healthy and full of life. She had talked to her daughter just 2 days ago, and April had been excited about her upcoming midterm exams and a new brand partnership she was working on. Carol threw on clothes and drove to April's apartment in a daze. The building was surrounded by police cars and ambulances, their flashing lights cutting through the cold February night. Yellow tape blocked off the entrance, and neighbors stood in small groups, whispering and pointing. Detective Mike Patterson met Carol at the police tape. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s who had seen too many tragic cases over his 20-year career. He led Carol to a quiet corner away from the crowd and explained what they had found. "Your daughter was discovered by her roommate Emma Wilson around 11:30 tonight," Detective Patterson said. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Holt, but it appears that April took her own life. She was found hanging in her bathroom." Carol felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "That's impossible. April would never do that. She had everything to live for. She was planning her future, making videos, talking about moving to Los Angeles after graduation." Detective Patterson had heard similar reactions from family members before. "I understand this is shocking, Mrs. Holt. Suicide is always difficult for families to accept. But we found a note on her computer, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Sometimes people hide their pain very well." Carol was allowed to enter the apartment briefly to see where April had died. The small bathroom looked ordinary, except for the police tape and chalk marks. The belt that had been used was now evidence, but Carol could see where it had been attached to the door frame. Something immediately felt wrong to Carol. The height didn't make sense. April was 5 feet 6 inches tall, and the door frame wasn't high enough for a hanging in the way the police described. April's feet would have been able to touch the ground easily. If she had wanted to hurt herself, she could have simply stood up. Emma Wilson was sitting in a police car, wrapped in a blanket and crying. She kept repeating to anyone who would listen that April had been making plans for the future and would never have killed herself. Emma told Carol that April had been excited about a study session they had planned for the next morning and had been looking forward to her midterm exams. She was worried about the exams, but in a normal way, Emma said through her tears. She was making jokes about it. She even posted a funny video about exam stress just a few hours ago. "Does that sound like someone who was planning to die?" Carol asked to see the suicide note that police had found on April's laptop. Detective Patterson printed out a copy for her, and Carol read it with growing confusion. The note talked about feeling overwhelmed by internet fame and pressure from followers, but the language didn't sound like April at all. The note used words and phrases that April never used. It talked about social media pressures and unable to cope with online harassment, but April always called it my TikTok and talked about her followers or fans. The note sounded like it was written by someone older, someone who didn't understand how young people actually talked about social media. Most importantly, the note was typed on the computer instead of handwritten. April was dyslexic and usually avoided typing long messages when possible. She preferred voice messages, handwritten notes, or asking friends to help her with important written communications. Carol had kept every birthday card and note April had written over the years, and she knew her daughter's writing style well. Carol tried to explain these concerns to Detective Patterson, but he seemed eager to close the case quickly. He pointed out that many young people struggle with mental health issues and that social media fame can be particularly stressful. He mentioned several similar cases he had handled over the years. Sometimes the people we think we know best are fighting battles we can't see, Detective Patterson said. Your daughter was under a lot of pressure. She was trying to balance college with her internet career, and she had been receiving some troubling messages from fans. Carol asked about these messages, and Detective Patterson mentioned that they had found some concerning comments on April's social media accounts. But when Carol asked if they had investigated the people who sent these messages, the detective said they had bigger priorities. Mrs. Holt, we get dozens of cases every week. We have to focus our limited resources on crimes where we can actually make arrests. Internet harassment is difficult to prosecute, and in this case, it's sadly too late to help your daughter. Carol left the police station feeling frustrated and angry. The official story didn't add up, but no one seemed interested in looking deeper. Detective Patterson had already filled out most of his paperwork and was ready to move on to other cases. Over the next few days, Carol began her own investigation. She requested copies of all police reports and crime scene photos through the Freedom of Information Act. She also gained access to April's social media accounts through the platform's bereavement policies, which allowed family members to manage deceased users' profiles. What Carol found in April's accounts shocked her. April had been receiving increasingly threatening messages from a user called Bradley K87 for months. The messages showed a clear pattern of escalation, from simple compliments to possessive demands to detailed fantasies about their life together. The most recent messages from Bradley were particularly disturbing. He had started talking about coming to see April and showing her how much he cared. In his final message sent just hours before April's death, Bradley had written, "Don't worry, baby. I'm going to take care of everything soon." Carol took this information back to Detective Patterson, but he remained dismissive. Mrs. Holt, thousands of people get weird messages online every day. There's no evidence this Bradley person was ever in Iowa, let alone in your daughter's apartment. But Carol wasn't ready to give up. She knew her daughter better than anyone, and she was certain that April had not killed herself. If the police wouldn't investigate properly, she would find the truth herself. Carol decided to hire a private investigator, using money from April's social media earnings that had been left to her. She contacted Janet Murphy, a former FBI agent who specialized in cybercrimes and had experience with cases involving online stalking. Janet Murphy agreed to take the case after reviewing the police reports and evidence Carol had gathered. She immediately saw several red flags that the police had missed or ignored. "The first thing we need to do is trace this Bradley Kane person," Janet told Carol. "If he's real, and if he was obsessed enough to send these messages, we need to find out where he was on the night your daughter died." Carol felt hope for the first time since April's death. Finally, someone was taking her concerns seriously and was willing to dig deeper into what had really happened that terrible night. Janet Murphy had worked on hundreds of cases during her time with the FBI, but something about April Holt's death felt wrong from the very beginning. After meeting with Carol and reviewing the police reports, Janet was convinced that the Cedar Rapids Police Department had rushed to judgment without conducting a proper investigation. Janet's first step was to learn everything she could about Bradley Kane. Using advanced search techniques that most local police departments didn't have access to, she began building a profile of April's most obsessive follower. Bradley Kane was 28 years old and worked as a mechanic at Joe's Auto Repair in Des Moines, Iowa. He lived alone in a small apartment above the shop and had no close friends or family nearby. His social media profile showed a lonely man who spent most of his free time online, following dozens of young female content creators. But April was different from the others. Bradley's activity on her posts was far more intense and frequent. He had commented on every single video she had posted for the past 6 months, often within minutes of her posting them. This suggested he had notifications turned on for her account and was monitoring her activity constantly. Janet discovered that Bradley had created multiple fake accounts to interact with April. When she blocked one account for inappropriate messages, he would simply create another one and continue his harassment. He had at least 7 different usernames that Janet could identify, all used to comment on April's content and send her private messages. The most disturbing discovery came when Janet analyzed the timestamps of Bradley's online activity. His comments and messages followed a clear pattern that matched April's daily schedule. He would be most active when April was typically at home, and his messages would decrease when she was usually in classes or at work. This suggested that Bradley had somehow learned April's routine and was timing his online harassment to coincide with when she would be most likely to see his messages. Janet realized that Bradley wasn't just a random internet stalker, but someone who had been studying April's life in detail. Janet's next breakthrough came when she examined April's phone and computer more carefully than the police had. Using specialized software, she discovered that April's phone had been infected with spyware about 3 weeks before her death. The spyware was sophisticated and would have allowed someone to access April's location, read her messages, and even activate her camera and microphone remotely. This explained how Bradley had been able to match his harassment to April's schedule so precisely. Janet traced the spyware installation to a specific date and location. Security cameras from a campus coffee shop showed Bradley Kane approaching April while she was studying. April could be seen looking up from her laptop and smiling, apparently thinking she was meeting a fan who had recognized her. The interaction lasted only a few minutes, but it was long enough for Bradley to ask for a selfie and briefly handle April's phone. While taking the photo, he had somehow managed to install the spyware that would allow him to monitor her every move for the following weeks. Emma Wilson confirmed that April had mentioned meeting a fan at the coffee shop but hadn't thought anything of it at the time. She said some guy recognized her and wanted a picture, Emma told Janet. She was actually happy about it because it meant her content was reaching people in real life. Janet's investigation also revealed that Bradley had quit his job at the auto repair shop 3 days before April's death, telling his boss that he had a family emergency and needed to take indefinite leave. His landlord reported that Bradley had paid 3 months' rent in advance, which was unusual for someone who typically paid month to month. Cell phone records, which the police had never requested, showed that Bradley's phone had been pinging cell towers along the route between Des Moines and Cedar Rapids in the days leading up to April's death. On the night she died, his phone had connected to towers near her apartment building between 9:30 and midnight. Hotel and motel records in the Cedar Rapids area showed that a man matching Bradley's description had checked into the budget Inn using a fake name and paying cash. The clerk remembered him because he had specifically requested a room where he could park his car out of sight from the main road. Janet also discovered that Bradley had been researching methods to make murder look like suicide. His internet search history, recovered from devices seized from his abandoned apartment, showed extensive research into hanging techniques, how to avoid leaving fingerprints, and methods for remotely accessing computers. Most damning of all, Janet found evidence that someone had remotely accessed April's laptop on the night of her death. The suicide note had been created at 11:47 p.m., nearly 2 hours after the coroner estimated April's time of death based on body temperature and other factors. Computer logs showed that the document had been created using administrator access, suggesting that someone with technical knowledge had gained control of April's computer. The note was saved to her desktop and then opened in her web browser, creating a digital trail that made it appear as if April had written it herself. Janet presented all of this evidence to Carol, who felt vindicated but also horrified by what her daughter had endured. "This monster was watching her every move for weeks," Carol said through tears. "April never had a chance." But Janet wasn't finished with her investigation. She had identified Bradley as April's killer, but she still needed to find him and build a case strong enough to convince prosecutors to file charges. Bradley had disappeared completely after April's death. He had abandoned his apartment, leaving behind most of his belongings, and his car had been found empty in a parking lot in Des Moines 3 days after the murder. His bank accounts showed no activity, and he seemed to have vanished without a trace. Janet knew that Bradley was probably still alive and hiding somewhere, but finding him would require resources that she didn't have as a private investigator. She needed law enforcement to take the case seriously and issue warrants for Bradley's arrest. Carol decided to take their evidence to the media. She contacted local news stations and true crime podcasters, hoping that public pressure would force the police to reopen April's case. The story of April Holt's death and her mother's investigation began gaining attention on social media. April's followers shared Carol's posts demanding justice, and the hashtag #JusticeForApril started trending on multiple platforms. The media attention put pressure on the Cedar Rapids Police Department and the district attorney's office. Detective Patterson found himself having to defend his investigation in newspaper interviews, and several of his conclusions began to look questionable under public scrutiny. District Attorney Lisa Rodriguez agreed to meet with Carol and Janet to review their evidence. Rodriguez was known for her work on domestic violence cases and had prosecuted several stalking cases in the past. After spending an entire afternoon reviewing Janet's findings, Rodriguez was convinced that April Holt had been murdered. She immediately authorized a formal reinvestigation of the case and issued a warrant for Bradley Cain's arrest. This is exactly the kind of case that shows why we need to take online stalking seriously, Rodriguez told reporters. A young woman died because someone became obsessed with her through social media, and the initial investigation failed to recognize the warning signs. The search for Bradley Cain began immediately, with law enforcement agencies across the Midwest on alert for a dangerous fugitive who had already killed once and might be planning to strike again. The search for Bradley Cain lasted 3 months and covered 5 states. Law enforcement agencies from Iowa to Texas were on the lookout for the man who had murdered April Holt and staged her death to look like suicide. But Bradley had planned his disappearance carefully, and finding him proved more difficult than anyone expected. Carol Holt refused to give up hope during the long search. She appeared on true crime podcasts, gave interviews to local news stations, and maintained active social media accounts dedicated to finding her daughter's killer. The hashtag #JusticeForApril had grown into a movement, with hundreds of thousands of people sharing information and keeping April's story in the public eye. The pressure from social media and news coverage was having an effect. The Cedar Rapids Police Department faced criticism for their handling of the original investigation, and Detective Patterson was quietly reassigned to desk duty while the department reviewed their procedures for investigating suspicious deaths. District Attorney Lisa Rodriguez kept Carol updated on the search efforts. Law enforcement agencies were following up on hundreds of tips from people who thought they had seen Bradley Cain, but most of the leads turned out to be false alarms. "He's probably living off the grid somewhere," Rodriguez told Carol during one of their regular meetings. "Men like Bradley often have survival skills from hunting or camping. He could be staying in remote areas where he won't be spotted easily." Janet Murphy continued working on the case, even though Bradley's location remained unknown. She had been analyzing the evidence from his abandoned apartment and had made several important discoveries that would be crucial when he was finally caught. The most significant find was a box hidden in Bradley's bedroom closet containing what could only be described as a shrine to April. The box held printed screenshots of every social media post April had made for the past year, along with detailed notes about her daily routine and the people in her life. Bradley had created a timeline of April's activities based on her social media posts and had cross-referenced it with information he gathered from following her online. He knew what time she usually went to classes, when she posted new videos, and even what she typically ate for breakfast. The box also contained items that Bradley had somehow obtained from April's daily life. There was a coffee cup with her name on it from the campus coffee shop, a pen that she had dropped in the parking lot of her apartment building, and even a receipt that she had thrown away. Most disturbing of all, Janet found evidence that Bradley had been inside April's apartment before the night he killed her. There were photos taken from inside her apartment showing details that would only be visible to someone who had been standing in her living room. Bradley had apparently figured out how to get into the building and had been entering April's apartment when she wasn't home. He had been studying her belongings, going through her personal items, and even sleeping in her bed based on photos that showed the covers disturbed. This man was completely obsessed, Janet told Carol. He had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. April was never safe once he fixated on her, The breakthrough in finding Bradley came from an unexpected source. A park ranger in southern Missouri contacted local police about a man who had been camping illegally in a remote area of the Mark Twain National Forest. The camper had been avoiding contact with other people and appeared to be living entirely off supplies he had brought with him. When local deputies went to investigate the illegal camping, they found Bradley Kane living in a small tent about 50 miles from the nearest town. He had been surviving on canned food and bottled water, apparently planning to stay hidden indefinitely. Bradley initially gave the deputies a false name, but his fingerprints quickly revealed his true identity. When the deputies realized they had found a wanted murder suspect, they called for backup and arrested Bradley without incident. Janet Murphy and Carol Holt drove to Missouri as soon as they heard about Bradley's arrest. Carol wanted to see the man who had killed her daughter, though she wasn't sure what she expected to feel when she saw him face to face. Bradley Kane looked very different from the photos on his social media profiles. He had lost significant weight. During his months in hiding, his hair and beard were long and unkempt, and he appeared much older than his 28 years. When he was brought into the police station in handcuffs, he kept his eyes on the floor and refused to make eye contact with anyone. During his first interrogation, Bradley maintained his innocence and claimed he had never been to Cedar Rapids. He said he had been camping in Missouri for months and knew nothing about April Holt's death beyond what he had seen on the news. But the evidence against Bradley was overwhelming. His fingerprints were found in April's apartment, his DNA was on items in his shrine box, and cell phone records proved he had been in Cedar Rapids on the night of the murder. When confronted with this evidence, Bradley's story began to change. He admitted that he had been a fan of April's content and had sent her messages, but he claimed their interactions had been innocent. He said he had never meant to hurt anyone and that April's death was a terrible accident. "I just wanted to meet her," Bradley told investigators. "I thought if she could see how much I cared about her, she would understand that we were meant to be together." Bradley's version of events was that he had gone to April's apartment to introduce himself, but she had become frightened and threatened to call the police. He claimed that she had tried to run away from him, and in trying to stop her, he had accidentally caused her to fall and hit her head. "I panicked when I saw she wasn't breathing," Bradley said. "I thought if I made it look like she had hurt herself, no one would blame me for what happened." But the physical evidence contradicted Bradley's story. The autopsy had shown that April had been strangled, not injured in a fall. The sleeping pills in her system proved that Bradley had drugged her before killing her, and the careful staging of the suicide scene showed planning and deliberation, not panic. Most importantly, the spyware on April's phone and the months of stalking behavior proved that Bradley had been planning to harm April for a long time. This wasn't an accidental death during a chance meeting, but a premeditated murder by an obsessed stalker. District Attorney Rodriguez announced that Bradley Kane would be charged with first-degree murder, breaking and entering, stalking, and several other related crimes. If convicted on all charges, he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. Carol Holt felt a mixture of relief and sadness when she heard about the charges. She was glad that Bradley had been caught and would face justice for killing April. But nothing could bring her daughter back or undo the months of terror April had experienced while being stalked. April was just trying to live her life and follow her dreams, Carol told reporters outside the courthouse. She didn't deserve what this man did to her. No one deserves to be hunted and killed by someone who thinks they own them. The case had attracted national attention, and Carol hoped that April's story would help other young people recognize the warning signs of online stalking and take threats more seriously. "If someone is making you uncomfortable online, don't ignore it," Carol said. "Tell someone you trust, document everything, and don't hesitate to contact law enforcement." April tried to handle this on her own, and it cost her everything. Bradley Kane's trial was scheduled to begin 6 months later, and Carol was determined to attend every day of the proceedings to see justice done for her daughter. The trial of Bradley Kane began on a cold Monday morning in January, almost exactly 1 year after April Holt's murder. The courthouse in Cedar Rapids was packed with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and April's supporters who had followed the case since Carol Holt first began fighting for justice. Carol sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, wearing a pin with April's photo and surrounded by Emma Wilson, Tyler Brooks, and other friends who had loved her daughter. She had waited for this moment for months, hoping to finally see the man who killed April face the consequences of his actions. District Attorney Lisa Rodriguez had built her case methodically over the past 6 months. She had expert witnesses, ready to testify about the digital evidence, the physical evidence from the crime scene, and Bradley's pattern of stalking behavior that led up to the murder. Bradley Kane sat at the defense table looking very different from the wild man who had been found camping in the Missouri woods. His public defender had convinced him to cut his hair and shave, and he wore a simple suit that made him look like an ordinary person rather than a dangerous killer. His defense attorney, James Wilson, faced an almost impossible task. The evidence against Bradley was overwhelming, but Wilson planned to argue that his client was mentally ill and had not intended to kill April. He hoped to get the charges reduced from first-degree murder to manslaughter, or to convince the jury that Bradley needed treatment rather than a life sentence. Judge Patricia Davis had presided over many high-profile cases during her 20 years on the bench, but she knew that this trial would be particularly challenging because of all the media, attention, and public interest in the case. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Rodriguez herself. She walked the jury through the timeline of Bradley's obsession with April, starting with his innocent-seeming comments on her videos and escalating to the sophisticated stalking operation that eventually led to murder. Bradley Kane didn't just kill April Holt, Rodriguez told the jury. He terrorized her for months, invaded her privacy, and stole her sense of safety before finally taking her life. This was not a crime of passion or a tragic accident. This was a planned and deliberate murder by a man who believed he had the right to own another human being. Rodriguez showed the jury screenshots of Bradley's messages to April, photos from his shrine box, and evidence of the spyware he had installed on her phone. The impact on the jury was visible as they realized the extent of Bradley's obsession and the fear April must have experienced. The defense's opening statement was much shorter and focused on Bradley's mental state. Wilson argued that his client was a lonely and disturbed man who had become obsessed with April, but never intended to hurt her. Bradley Kane is a sick man who needs help, not someone who deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison, Wilson told the jury. He never meant for April Holt to die, and he has been tormented by guilt ever since that terrible night. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks to present and included testimony from dozens of witnesses. Emma Wilson was one of the first to testify, describing her friendship with April and the fear they both felt as Bradley's messages became more threatening. April tried to laugh it off at first, Emma told the jury through tears. But toward the end, she was really scared. She had changed her locks and was thinking about getting a restraining order. She knew something was wrong. Tyler Brooks testified about April's excitement for the future and her plans to move to Los Angeles after graduation. His testimony was important because it contradicted any suggestion that April had been suicidal or unhappy with her life. The most powerful testimony came from Janet Murphy, the private investigator who had uncovered most of the evidence against Bradley. Janet walked the jury through her investigation step by step, showing how the police had missed crucial evidence and explaining why Bradley's story about an accidental death was impossible. Every piece of evidence in this case points to premeditated murder, Janet testified. The spyware, the stalking, the research into suicide methods, the careful staging of the crime scene. Nothing about this was accidental or spontaneous. Dr. Williams, the forensic pathologist who had performed the second autopsy on April's body, testified about the physical evidence that proved April had been murdered. The jury looked uncomfortable as she described the ligature marks that were inconsistent with suicide and the evidence that April had been drugged before she was killed. The computer expert who had analyzed April's devices testified about the spyware and the remote access to her laptop after her death. This evidence was crucial in proving that Bradley had been monitoring April's activities and had created the fake suicide note to cover up his crime. Perhaps the most dramatic moment of the trial came when prosecutors played a recording of one of Bradley's police interrogations. In the recording, Bradley could be heard describing his obsession with April in disturbing detail. "She was perfect," Bradley's voice said through the courtroom speakers. I knew we were meant to be together. I was trying to protect her from all the other guys who didn't understand her like I did. When the prosecution finished presenting their case, the evidence against Bradley seemed overwhelming. But his defense attorney still had to try to save his client from a life sentence. The defense called several witnesses who testified about Bradley's difficult childhood and his struggles with mental illness. His former boss at the auto shop described him as a quiet and reliable employee who had never shown signs of violence. A psychiatrist hired by the defense testified that Bradley suffered from severe depression and had developed an unhealthy attachment. To April, that was a symptom of his mental illness rather than evidence of criminal intent. But the defense's case was weakened when Bradley himself took the stand to testify. Against his attorney's advice, Bradley insisted on telling his version of events to the jury. Bradley's testimony was rambling and often incoherent. He continued to claim that he had never intended to hurt April and that her death was a tragic accident. But under cross-examination by Rodriguez, Bradley revealed the depth of his obsession and his inability to accept that April didn't want anything to do with him. "She belonged with me," Bradley said at one point, causing several jury members to look shocked. "All those other guys following her online, they didn't really know her. I was the one who understood her." Rodriguez's cross-examination was devastating. She showed Bradley his own messages to April, his research into murder methods, and photos from his shrine box. With each piece of evidence, Bradley became more agitated and defensive. "You installed spyware on her phone so you could track her every move," Rodriguez said. "You broke into her apartment multiple times to go through her belongings. You drugged her and strangled her when she tried to get away from you. How is any of that an accident?" Bradley's answer was barely coherent. "I just wanted her to understand," he mumbled. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching their verdict. When they returned to the courtroom, the tension was so thick that Carol could barely breathe. She had waited over a year for this moment, and she needed to know that her daughter's killer would face justice. The jury foreman stood and read the verdict in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. "We, the jury, find the defendant Bradley Kane guilty of murder in the first degree." Carol collapsed into tears of relief as the rest of the verdicts were read. Bradley was found guilty on all charges, including stalking, breaking and entering, and tampering with evidence. Judge Davis sentenced Bradley Kane to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, Bradley finally looked directly at Carol for the first time during the entire trial. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only anger and confusion that his victim's mother had fought so hard to see him punished. After the trial, Carol spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. "April can finally rest in peace knowing that her killer will never hurt anyone else," she said. But this case shows how dangerous online stalking can be and how important it is for law enforcement to take these crimes seriously from the beginning. Carol used the media attention to launch the April Holt Foundation, which provides resources for content creators dealing with harassment and stalking. The foundation also works with social media platforms to improve their reporting systems and trains law enforcement officers on investigating cybercrimes. 2 years after the trial, April's TikTok account remains active as a memorial managed by Carol and Emma. They occasionally post tributes to April and information about online safety. The account has become a resource for young people who are dealing with harassment or stalking situations. Carol often speaks at colleges and conferences about her daughter's case and the importance of taking online threats seriously. She tells audiences that April's murder could have been prevented if the warning signs had been recognized earlier and if law enforcement had been better trained to investigate cybercrimes. April loved making people smile through her videos, Carol says at these events. She never hurt anyone and didn't deserve what happened to her. But if her story can help keep other young people safe, then her death won't have been completely meaningless.